Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Anderson. I am chair of the Conference Council, and I welcome you to this evening's workshop on the proposed changes to the Hawaii Conference bylaws. These will be coming before the body on Saturday morning. The printed copies were distributed with the Aha Pae āina mailing, and you can also find them in the Aha Makua handbook, where they start on page B9. Now, I do want to quickly comment on one element of the agenda, which is that the major portion of the bylaws revisions are one item, but there is a small portion of the bylaws revisions, that is the proposal that's before you, that is a separate item. And that item is related to changes in Article 12, Section 2. The proposed bylaws amendments in front of you propose to remove the Samoan Council and the Council of Filipino Ministry from the list of example affiliated ministries. That will be voted on separately from the rest of the items, because over the course of the development of these bylaws, while we worked to find out whether those bodies were in fact still engaged in ministry, when we found out that they had been, it was after the bylaws had been voted to be recommended to the Aha Makua by the Conference Council. So therefore, the business committee for the Aha voted to separate that change out from the rest, and is recommending that the Aha Makua delegates vote no on that item, because those bodies exist and are active, and there is no reason to remove them from the list of example affiliated ministries. There is one other change in Article 12, which is to correct the name of Christian Endeavor. That one is still part of the main bylaws revisions, so that one will be included with the rest of the items. So from there, I'm going to hand you over to Woody Kita. Woody Kita is the chair of the administration team. The bylaws revisions came from the administration team, were presented to the Conference Council last December for review, and then the council voted on the proposals in February. So they have been before members of the Conference Council for quite some time. But Woody, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eric. The items I'll be referring to are part of your handbook, pages B9 to B26. So on page B9 is an overview of the amendment changes. So let me briefly go over them. So number one, Article 3 is well, before that, many of these changes, several of the changes are actually change in names or terminology to update what we're using here in Hawaii, and also what the United Church of Christ currently uses. So the first change, Article 3, is updating current UCC terminology on students in care, now referred to as members in discernment, and the UCC board replaced by name the UCC Executive Council. So that is the first change in the list of changes for the bylaws. Now, the second change is in Article 4, and that's found on page 3. And this is adding electronic meetings for the Aha Pae āina. And we have been using it via Zoom, like exactly today, and in our meetings. So this will clarify how the electronic meetings will be accomplished by the Aha Pae āina. The next three items are related to being in compliance with the Hawaii Conference Foundation bylaw changes, which become effective July 1, 2022. So I'm moving on to item 3, Article 5, which is on page 4. And this is again to be in compliance with the foundation changes. It's no longer going to be a membership organization, and the chair of the conference council will no longer chair the members meeting. Moving on to item 4, which is changing Article 6, found on pages 5 and 6. Again, these are to be in compliance or in line with the foundation changes, where the voting status and the terms for the trustees to directors are in line with the foundation new bylaws. And the next item, the 5th one, is in Article 11, found on pages 8 and 9. And these are, again, to be in alignment with the revised foundation bylaws. And primarily for this one, it will clarify how the conference selects its members for the board of directors. The 6th change comes in Article 9 on page 12. And again, this is background on the foundation. A lot of it is being changed to be in compliance with the new bylaws of the foundation. The 7th item is in Article 11 on standing committees. And this is again a terminology change to follow the current use in the United Church of Christ. And the last item is Article 12, which actually Reverend Anderson went over with us regarding the Samoan and Filipino ministry bodies and the name change for Christian Endeavor. So that's a quick look at the changes that are coming before you in the business meeting. You will hear more about the background and about the foundation bylaw changes that drive these proposed amendments. Thank you. So if there's no questions at this point, Reverend Anderson.
I guess that means I'm supposed to move us along to our next presenter. And is that you, Andy, or you, David? I've forgotten.
I believe that's me, just to give some background.
Okay.
We're going to talk for a minute about the foundation bylaws, because much of what's on the table for the conference bylaws at this AHA are changes simply to be consistent with what's been adopted for the foundation. So the foundation amended its bylaws back in 2018 by a vote of 2/3 of its membership. And the effective date originally was July 19, 2019, but the membership decided some additional time is needed for study and for a lot of the administrative pieces that go along with it, deferred the effective date to July 1, 2022, next month. The changes have since been extensively reviewed and discussed since its adoption 4 years ago, including by new staff. We brought on a new ED and a new conference minister. We've had a number of members meetings since then where it's been discussed, and we had several conference-wide Zoom calls to discuss these changes. Changes have already been approved by the members of the foundation, so it's not up for a vote at this AHA. They will take effect July 1. But because we are doing corresponding changes to be consistent in the conference bylaws, we wanted to take the time to explain what those changes were. So the reasons the foundation amended its bylaws. First was to provide better protection and preservation of the resources of the foundation by better separating the asset management functions from the spending functions of our larger conference. This was really the original intent of creating the foundation in the first place, to make sure that there wasn't undue influence over the corpus of what we're trying to preserve for endowment and for the future, based upon immediate expenditure needs. With the bulk of the membership of the board of directors of the conference controlled by the conference council, essentially, there has historically been a great deal of pressure to meet immediate and short-term financial needs of the conference. It's been harder for the trustees to act independently to preserve the corpus. The examples that we've talked about in previous AHAs and on many occasions in the past about recent draws against investments being too high, averaging around 8% over the last 10 years, which is nearly twice what it should be from a fiduciary standpoint, is a really good example of that type of pressure. The second reason that the changes were made was to ensure that the foundation will be able to benefit from arrangements which require independent governance, such as conditions imposed by prospective donors, where, for example, they create a trust or an endowment fund for a specific purpose, but they stipulate that the principle, the corpus, needs to be preserved. A really good example of this is the Cone Trust. The Cone Trust, under the Cone Trust, the foundation is a trustee, a formal trustee, and the conference is a beneficiary.
And Andy, you're being asked to speak up. Some people are finding it difficult to hear you.
Okay, I will try and speak up. Thank you. I apologize. So the Cone Trust is a scenario where the foundation serves as a trustee for the conference. The conference is a beneficiary. And under basic trust law principles, where you have a situation that the beneficiary controls the trustee structurally, it's very difficult it essentially defeats the trust. So these changes were largely instituted out of a concern that we didn't want these trust arrangements to fail because the conference has too much control over the fiduciary decisions of the foundation trustees. The third reason these changes were created was to create a structure under which the foundation would again have a little more independence to focus on long-term issues as opposed to the immediate daily operational needs of the conference. And finally, and of a lesser degree, the changes do update and conform terminology that are currently used under our Hawaii Nonprofit Corporations Act, and they do simplify governance to reduce a lot of administrative bureaucracy that we have in our current structure. So what are the changes, the big changes? The big change is the way that our directors, the Board of Trustees, are appointed. Under the new structure, the foundation will have a board of directors of 11 voting directors plus 1 non-voting director. 5 of the directors will be nominated and elected by the conference. And the way that the conference does that is what's proposed in the current conference bylaws amendment. There are 4 directors who will be elected, and 1 serves by virtue of his or her position. That one person is the chair of the conference council. On the other side, there are 6 remaining directors, and they will be nominated and elected by the existing Hawaii Conference Foundation board, the entire board, including those members of the board who are come to their position through the conference. This allows more flexibility to appoint directors to meet background and expertise needs as well, which a lot of the time we do need on the conference board of directors. The conference minister will continue to serve on the board, but with voice and no vote. This resolves a conflict of interest issue, but permits the conference minister continued voice and influence in the foundation board discussions and debates. So looking at this substance, why change how directors are appointed? Well, as I said earlier, it allows the board, excuse me, that allows the HCUCC board as a whole to appoint a bare majority of voting directors. That's sufficient to create enough structural independence, just enough to allow HCF to benefit from arrangements which require, under the law, independent governance, those trust arrangements that I was talking about. The other big change is that we are moving from being a membership corporation to a non-member corporation. So why change to a non-member corporation? The vast majority of nonprofit corporations today are non-member corporations, especially fiduciary organizations similar to ours. It will also it will provide easier guidance and interpretation of applicable law as we're sorting through our difficult decisions. And also it'll improve administrative convenience and limit duplication of efforts and help with cost saving. Under the old bylaws, as we'll call them, the members had really only 3 duties, and that one was to approve bylaws amendments, the second was to approve the annual budget, and the third was to select an auditor every 3 to 5 years. The vast majority of those decisions, the work, the time and spent on that are essentially done by, have been done by the board of directors. So there is really very little change to the decision-making structure related to the decisions around that. Furthermore, the fiduciary duties of the board, the things we have to care for, the duty of loyalty, the duty of care, the duty of confidentiality, the duty to manage our money in a prudent way, remain unchanged. Those duties continue to run to the conference. The very purpose of the foundation under the new bylaws, under this current structure, is the same as the old. And that is to be essentially a financial ministry of the Hawaii Conference and to support it. The conference will still have significant influence over the foundation's affairs. Looking at the purpose section of our new bylaws, it was made more concise, but still states that the purpose of the foundation is to receive and administer funds and securities and other property for the purpose of advancing the mission of the conference and its successors, including its churches, ministers, through the management of custodial accounts or otherwise, and very generally and broadly to advance the cause of Christian religion in such other matter as may be suitable. Other less substantive changes deal with more mundane operating things, such as the conference is looking at updating some language, providing some additional structure on committee formation, provisions that make it easier to call meetings, and direction on actions and telephonic meetings and electronic signature and that sort of stuff. Not very exciting stuff, but stuff that needs to be looked at and changed from time to time. So what's next up is what's before the AHA at this meeting, and that is to review, for the conference to review its own bylaws to make them consistent with the changes that occurred in the foundation bylaws. It's not to conform or to be in compliance with, because the foundation cannot and does not tell the conference what to do, but it is to make them consistent, because We are related to each other structurally and corporately. We are in ecclesiastical covenant with each other, and we continue to want to focus on the combined purpose of supporting the conference and its mission. So that is, in a nutshell, what the changes to the foundation bylaws are all about. So I will turn it over to David to talk a little bit more about all of that.
Thank you, Andy. This is an interesting piece, and I need to put myself within this conversation, right? This is a conversation that was brought to a fruition in 2018, voted on at that time. So the bylaws within the foundation were changed at that time, although delayed, for the conference to keep its bylaws up. That would be a simple conversation if it didn't overlap another conversation within the conference. And that's what I'm here to talk about, is this other conversation. So you see my roadmap of narratives. We have various, I don't want to say opposing, but various different ways of looking at the financial well-being of the conference. So in this short presentation, we're going to look at our financial streams. Then we're going to talk about some narratives that are kind of the white elephant in the room, if you would. Does the tail wag the dog? Does the foundation manipulate the conference? Is the dog biting off its tail? Will we get to enlightenment? That's my goal. We'll get to the enlightenment where the dog and the tail are one. So that's kind of what we'll do in the next couple of minutes here. You'll see here some financial streams. Now, this is from the end of April. The report that you will receive later on during the Aha Makua will be updated to the end of May. So these percentages will change slightly, but the overall pieces of the pie kind of remain. You will see that the largest stream of income that we have is from our endowments. It is from our foundation and the assets that the foundations watch for us. The next largest stream is OCWM, our church's wider mission, but you see it is less than 45% of our income that's brought in, and it continues to shrink. And then you see the third largest stream are grants. Our staff works hard to go after and receive grants, so that's our third largest stream that we have going on. What I want you to realize again, right, the largest stream is from our endowments. And when we get to the point where we're looking for extra money, where we're looking to stretch into certain missional and ministry goals, it is very human nature to go to the deepest well to draw that money from. And that has kind of been what the conference has been doing. As we have said in other presentations, the average draw out of the conference funds was way up there. We should be around 4.5 to 5%, and we've been over 8%, and that has had consequences. So we'll look at that a little more as well. So one of the stories that are out there, one of the narratives that are out there in the conference is that the tail is wagging the dog, that the conference foundation is setting the direction and missional trajectory of the conference through its manipulation of conference funds. We won't give you this money, or we'll give you this money only if it's used here, or the various other things I've heard people say. And because of that, there's then part of that narrative is we must protect ourselves from the foundation which has gone rogue. The foundation is wagging the conference versus the other way around. Now, these decisions, again, were made in 2018. I arrived in the fall of 2019. So I'm just bringing in observations on not necessarily why these provisions are good, but how conference financial well-being is being handled. And this is the primary conversation. It's the primary narrative that has structured how we have viewed the conference finances and how people may or may not be telling truth around those finances. This is it. This is the lens. I am not quite sure from my observations that this lens is as focused as it needs to be. I tend to look at things through another lens, and that is the dog is biting off its tail. Prior to Andy and my arrivals, the annual draw rate, we've talked about this from the endowment, was over 8%. It was up to 8.5%, I believe, my first year here. Fund number one, which out there in the conference is considered the conference discretionary fund, was spent to zero by April of 2019. But the conference didn't know that until the fall of 2019, when our controller at the time, Corinne Morishige, began warning us that the conference is heading toward a cliff at this draw, and she predicted that within 9 years, the conference would bankrupt itself if we continued at that draw. That's very important because when we begin raising this up, Corinne initially took a lot of flack over it. Later on, I would be called a liar over it. So I know people don't quite understand this lens or care to look at this lens because we're based in that other narrative of the tail wagging the dog. But here, when we dig beneath the surface, we begin to see what's happening. And there's real life consequences to this, right? The 2019 audit report almost included an ongoing concern notice. It did not because Corinne had warned the council, and the council had took steps to reduce our draw. So we stepped away from that ongoing concern, but they did note to us verbally that had we not been doing that, they would have included that notice in writing. Since 2019, Aha Pae, āina, the office is down by two staff positions, right? Dorothy's position and Tracy's black position. No longer with us because we can no longer afford those positions. We do have 2 new ACMs, but remember, they're both part-time, so 2 part-times make 1 full-time position. So be aware of that. In 2021, we balanced the budget on the back of the conference staff furlough. So the compensation, we asked our staff to make less that year so we could balance the budget. This year, when we get to our own budget conversation, you're going to find out that we're going to recommend a different split in OCWM, what we retain and what we pass on to national offices to balance the budget. These are real consequences to our overdraws that have finally caught up with us. So I just want to point that out. From my perspective, the true financial story of the conference is that the dog has been dangerously close to biting off its tail. So where do we want to be as a conference? Well, we want to be at enlightenment, right? Where the dog and the tail, we are one, we are one. We're not fighting with each other or anything of that nature. We are doing what God has called us to do in terms of the mission and ministry and the support of that mission and ministry of the conference. So the goal of the bylaw changes is to allow, as Andy has said, more objectivity so the foundation trustees, soon to be the directors, might better manage the conference asset while at the same time safeguarding from the rogue tail. And we do that because the bylaw changes means only that the foundations recruit 1 more board of director member than does the conference. The conference appointed board of directors participate in the voting of those on the board of directors. Andy and I become ex officio, so voice with that vote on each other's councils for me, board for Andy, right? That's how we safeguard the rogue tail. And again, as Andy has said, and I think Eric pointed out as well, the foundation will be transformed from a membership corporation with a board of trustees to a non-member corporation with a board of directors. So those are the changes. That's how we are seeking to become one. Some of this was fostered upon us by changes in expectations out of Hawaii regulations around fiduciary needs, but we can use this time to reach enlightenment and to better safeguard the financial well-being of the conference. So with that, we can open it up for questions.
And there's plenty of questions already. Kahu Reni Mao has 3 questions. Is this updated foundation bylaws available for us to read? So my assumption is you all have the conference bylaws, right? So I'm thinking Rennie wants to know about the foundation bylaws.
The foundation bylaws, I believe, have been posted. They're online through the website. I'm pretty sure Lori can confirm that, but that's my understanding.
Okay. Number 2, are board directors of the foundation required to be an active member of one of our UCC churches?
Well, it's always been the policy as implemented that our directors, our trustees, are members of UCC churches. The new bylaws don't require that explicitly, but the old bylaws don't require that either. It's just been done, and I don't envision that to change by way of policy going forward into the future.
Okie dokie. Are board directors of the foundation representing our various associations?
The board of directors under the new policies, the nominating committee would be charged with developing a composition of the board that is generally representative of the membership of the conference. So just as we do today, we want to have representation from the different associations and constituencies that should continue into the future. And as well as to make sure that we provide a level of practical and professional expertise to the board. So that's a part of the foundation's current policies related to directors, and those policies will remain in effect after July 1.
Okay, thank you. Lorraine, you want to do the next one?
Sure. Here we go. Question, Linda Rich is asking, can this PowerPoint be shared with participants?
I'm sure if you're talking about the foundation PowerPoint, yes. And actually there is an even more detailed version of that, I think, that we did and had previously posted. So we'll make sure that that's available to everybody.
And just, if I may step in, just a reminder, this was a first Wednesday conversation, and that conversation should be posted up on the website as well under our first Wednesday pieces. Other questions out there?
Carissa Carmelo would like to know, would all land assets be held under the foundation?
Well, there wouldn't be a change to the current holdings. What the foundation now holds, it would continue to hold. If the conference decides to transfer additional properties it may acquire to the foundation, we would do that. Same thing with local churches. If they desire us to hold their property, we would do that under the usual policies that we do. But there's really no change to the plan related to land holdings at the present time.
Okay, Brian Welsh asked, the conference council was told the assets would be split to both the foundation and the conference. As a member of the council, these decisions have not been shared, even though the July 1st, 2022 deadline is around the corner. Has some other decision or plan been implemented?
As I understand the question, well, first of all, we looked at the assets of the foundation. Essentially, what the foundation holds, it holds for the benefit of the conference. So there's really nothing to split. Roughly a third of our assets, about 30%, are composed of the unrestricted funds that the foundation holds, but we use those funds to pay for the foundation mission expenses. And then that's where the draw that the conference gets every year comes from. We hold those again for the benefit of the conference. About 7% of the funds we hold are custodial funds that actually are owned outright by the conference. They can contribute, withdraw whenever they want. Same thing with about roughly 30% of our holdings are custodial funds for local churches and associations. And again, those are not assets that belong to the foundation. We just co-invest those monies belong to those entities. And the remaining block of assets, again, roughly 30%, consist of the endowment funds, where we have a heightened sort of trust duty. And again, by and large, those endowment funds are there to support the conference and its various mission projects. So it's, there's not a pool of assets where we can just say, hey, conference, you get this, foundation, you get that, because we have a very complicated and integrated relationship where the foundation's purpose is to support conference activities. And that's what we do. And in many cases, hold those funds in trust.
Okay, question from Linda Shigeta. Are most churches non-member corporations, and what percentage might that be?
Before you speak, Andy, I think we need to do some defining of terms here, right? There's church in the UCC, that's local congregation. There's church in the UCC, that's the conference. And there's church in the UCC that also refers to the national setting of the church. So I just want to help define those out.
Thank you, David. I think to answer Linda's question, the local church structure is almost in every case that I know of in the UCC a member corporation. So it's a congregational policy. So the local churches are structured as membership corporations. I can't say that that's the absolute rule, but I think by and large that's probably true.
We have another question in Q&A from an anonymous attendee. I think what they're asking is, are the nominations to the foundation, will they all be controlled under the conference?
Well, there's a slide that I presented that specifically addressed how that would happen. So the conference would have a nomination process for the directors that it will elect or appoint to the foundation board, and the foundation board will have a nomination process for the other group that is appointed by the entirety of the foundation board.
So in chat, Carissa Carmelo asks, would the split affect donors' ability to access funds? Do we go through the conference or the foundation?
I mean, it depends on what the fund is.
Yeah.
I mean, Carissa, if it's if it's an AHEC fund, for example, if it were a custodial fund, it's the same drill. You would come and talk to the foundation, make a withdrawal. If it's talking about funding for mission support, again, our purpose is we would probably look to the conference council and the conference itself to help prioritize what the mission expenditures will be, and it's really our job on the foundation side to steward the assets and make sure that there's funding available for that.
Okay, question from the Q&A from Rob Kojima. The conference, like the church, has found that doing things the way we have always done is unsustainable. We need to reassess what we are called to do. We need to reassess our expectations of the conference. We must find ways of empowering the resources available to us, associations, local churches, para support groups. The foundation does not have the money for us to continue thinking that we can operate in the same way, doing what we have done in the past. The new church means being new. Sorry, it's probably just a comment, no question in there.
Jocelyn Costa says, in the dog bite off its tail, as you refer to as the council, was it not due to the ED of the foundation?
From my perspective, no. It was due to missional emphasis that did not fall within the budget of the year that the missional emphasis were looking to be underdone or undertaken, and therefore requests were made and requests were granted around those pieces. Most of those missional endeavors, from what I can discern, to be honest, is support of local churches in special ways that would be beyond what was already in the conference budget for those years.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Hoping though, Jocelyn, you're not referring to the current present ED.
There is a question referring to Article 10, and they're asking, why are the funds also being used for the General Synod and the Covenanted Ministries of the United Church of Christ?
This is a Woody question, Article 10.
I think we're dealing with two different entities. General Synod, right, are funds that get your conference delegates to the General Synod and underwrite those costs. Funds to covenanted entities tend to be funds to, what are the covenanted entities, Eric? I'm drawing a total blank on national offices now.
I think the questioner is referring to a quote from the Hawaii Conference Foundation bylaws. That is the portion of the bylaws that defines the purposes, which is the major changes in Article 10. And in that section, it says that the HCF, pardon me while I get it in front of me again, to receive and administer funds, securities, and other property for the purposes of advancing the mission of the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ and its successors, including its churches, ministers, and the General Synod and Covenanted Ministries of the United Church of Christ. So the questioner is asking why those others got included.
Yeah, well, they're actually, what happened in the mission statement for the foundations, it just got more concise. So all the stuff that you see in the strike through is subsumed in the more generalized statements that currently exist. So it doesn't, if the conference desires to develop a way to continue to enhance support for a national ministry or whatever it might be, all that could still take place.
Am I assuming this is older language we're dealing with here in the strikeout?
Correct.
There was a time when the conference did very well with its finances. It was able to share those finances through the UCC beyond the conference. So my guess is that language kind of covers that type of financial support and giving.
Okay. From Ron Fujiyoshi in chat, I don't know whether everyone knows that both the AHEC and the Hawaii Island Mokupuni or Association voted against the division of the Hawaii Conference Foundation from the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ. Can the two of you who have theological training give us a theological reason why the foundation should not be under the church? Thank you.
I don't think the foundation's being split off. I think that's a rumor that's out there that's false. What we're doing, the foundation exists as the financial mission or the financial arm of the conference. Without us, it has no reason to exist, and it ceased to exist for those purposes. What we are doing is following the logic and the rationale of state regulations that says those who safeguard the endowment should not be over-influenced, or the voting members of those who spend the endowment, to put it in language that I understand. So theologically, right, we would say this is where we look at how churches maintain their financial well-being without always having to go to the membership and beg. This is a way for churches, this church, the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ, to maintain much of the missions that we have been involved in. All of the examples of where we have balanced the budget, right? None of that included missions that were cut. We have tried to preserve the missions we are involved in and even stretch those missions a little further. Those of you who receive Friends of the Conference letters from me, you always hear me talk about our stretch goals. Just a little more money and we can do this, right? That type of piece. So theologically, if we want to, well-being in my mind is connected to love. So, missions, to be blunt, follows money. And so for us to do missions, we have to have the finances with which to do them. So to enact love, to advance God's kingdom of love, we need the finances to be able to do that. And I think this change from my perspective, and then again, these are changes that happened before I arrived. I'm just giving my perspective on the financial well-being of the conference. But I think this change allows us to be stronger in our pledge to the next generation to say, there will be finances here for your missions of love to Hawaii and beyond, whatever that may be. So that would be my theological background. I don't know if the other theological background was Eric or not, but I'll leave it up to somebody else then.
I'm guessing it probably was. And Ron, it's an excellent question. And unfortunately, theology is a very slippery thing. On the whole, I look at things and I say, yes, the Christian church should be in charge of the Christian church's assets. However, I also note that historically, churches have done that in a number of different ways. I come from New England, and in New England for centuries, the practice was that the church was a gathered congregation. And then there was an ecclesiastical society that owned the property and managed all the money. And the governing bodies of the two were not the same. The ecclesiastical society, in fact, had to represent every person within the parish, within a geographical boundary, and the church didn't. So in fact, the society had a broader range of concern than the church did. I will also note that that particular form of government is nearly extinct in most New England churches. The missionary society that sent missionaries here was not an official church body. It was an ad hoc collection of people who got together and who raised support and who recruited people to journey, but it was not authorized by an official ecclesiastical body of the church. And yet missionary societies sprang up all over the place and did amazing things through much of the 19th century. So the way I look at it, the church is still managing the foundation's monies, but it is not necessarily the ecclesiastical establishment that is in the place to call the shots. And as somebody who is pretty well rooted in the ecclesiastical establishment after 30 years, there's a part of me that says, that's not such a bad thing. But it doesn't have to be done this way. Plenty of churches have done it differently. We'll just look and see how this one works.
Okay, follow-up question from Linda Shigeta. Are most religious nonprofit organizations existing as non-member corporations?
I don't know the answer to that. I know what the experience is in the UCC, and I said earlier that the churches themselves are, which are nonprofit organizations, are generally structured as member corporations. But there are other ministries and other organizations which have different structures. And if you go as broad as religious organization, it is anything and everything you can think of.
There's another question that says, I do not see in the original text of Article 10, I believe, of the Foundation Bylaws, to fund beyond our conference, churches, and recognized organizations. The change I see is the addition of General Synod and the covenanted ministries of the UCC. Can we keep it as such?
Just to quickly answer the observation about the original text of Article 10, the questioner is quite right about it not being present in Section 1, Article 10, Section 1, subsection A, because it was in subsection B. What has been done in Article 10, Section 1 is to collapse those three subsections. And so that language was there, but it's now condensed. To answer the second part of the question, we are not actually able to amend bylaws amendments on the floor of the Aha Pae. And the reason for this is because our bylaws call for a notice period before bylaws can be voted on. So an amendment from the floor would have to be ruled out of order because it doesn't meet the notice requirement. That said, it is possible through a parliamentary vote to consider different sections separately. So the same text is being considered, but you can consider Section 10 separately from, say, Section 4.
One last question in the Q&A. How do we do that, or what is the procedure?
Okay. The procedure is called to divide the question. So you need to know which sections you want to consider separately from other sections, okay? And you need to be able to identify that clearly to us. That does require that you be recognized as a speaker. So as a delegate, you would raise your hand, and at some point I would be calling upon you. The body would then need to vote by a majority to divide the question and treat them separately. Also, that's not a debatable motion. That is, the motion gets made, it gets seconded, we proceed immediately to a vote on it. If it passes, we consider the question separately. If it doesn't pass, we continue on with the question as is. I see Jocelyn's question. When is it proper to do so? When that particular matter is on the floor. So you'd ask to be recognized, make the motion, and we would then proceed to vote on whether to divide the question.
One more question in chat from Brian Welsh. Quick question to satisfy the stakeholders I represent. What safeguards do you see to stop a hypothetical situation where the majority of non-conference directors decided to change the purpose?
Well, it would be very hard to change the purpose since most of the assets, pretty much all of the assets, are held already specifically for the foundation. It would be a scenario, I think, where you would have to get the Attorney General involved in order to change the purpose, to potentially even the probate court. So it's not an avenue that the board would go down. The conference, as I said in my presentation, still retains significant control over the foundation in appointing the 5 directors, the presence of the conference minister, the fact that those 5 directors are all involved in the decision to appoint the additional 6 directors, and that our purpose is to support the UCC, that the Hawaii Conference of the UCC, our members will be part of all of that. So it's not something that I see could happen easily, if at all.
I'm not seeing any additional questions. Staff, are you seeing any?
No, sir.
No,
No.
Then, friends, thank you so much for your attention and engagement with these questions of the changes in how the Hawaii Conference will govern itself as we move forward. It reflects, I think, the deepest care and compassion and concern and responsibility for the ministry of the church in Hawaii, and I am grateful. So the matters will come up on Saturday, and I look forward to actually seeing your faces in the little Zoom boxes on that day. Until then, I wish you all the best. May the Holy Spirit fill your souls with joy, with wisdom, and with love. Aloha.
Aloha.